First question. Does feeling sympathy for women who are sex workers make a woman a bad feminist?
Oh, you really do just jump right in. It's so interesting. I grew so accustomed to like three standard reactions when I would, come out with my past. Some people were like so obviously titillated, like a drawing towards, but in a show way. Like you could feel the objectification, and maybe some women
Mm-hmm.
are tuned in enough to know what that feels like. So there's either that, and then there's like immediate sympathy. Mm. And then there's like a real neutrality,
Mm.
right? Because like I don't want anyone to presume I I I I need pity, or I deserve that sort of like hand holding. Like maybe not. And I think this is true when anyone comes out with any sort of stigmatizing experience. Can we just um hold it with neutrality? Now, does it make you a bad feminist if you have one of these other responses? Absolutely not. Like, I'm never going to call anyone a bad feminist for anything. But I am going to be curious and perhaps critical about the responses, right? Why? My favorite response, though, is when people are sympathetic over what happened to me on account of the New York Post. And that's really where I love when people go straight there, which is like, it's not even about that. It's about your experience being victimized by the Post.
Which is important.
Right.
Because there's no one driving piece to anybody's life story, right?
Right.
And being a sex worker at one moment in your life is not going to be determinant of anything any more than the New York Post article is going to be determinant, any more than being a mother is going to be determinant,
Right.
right? You're just a person and we all have our layers and our experiences. Melissa Petro was working as a New York City elementary school teacher in 2011 when she authored a 700-word essay for the Huffington Post that changed her life. In it, she argued that Craigslist should not take down its sex services page based on the assumption that all call girls on Craigslist were either underage or trafficked. She could attest to this, she wrote, having been a former call girl on Craigslist herself. It was not long before a reporter connected her name on that article with her job as an elementary art teacher, and overnight, Melissa was a mass media pariah. Forced to resign by the DOE, the aspiring writer experienced humiliation on a life-changing scale. And while she had never actually hidden her past, she had also not yet fully processed the violent backdrop of her childhood, the slippery slope from stripping to actual prostitution, or the escalating substance abuse that had numbed her just enough to get through. Today, Melissa is a journalist with a family of her own. She is sober, and she has authored a book called Shame: How to Be a Woman in the Age of Mortification. On today's podcast, we're diving right in. Does feeling sympathy for sex workers make you a bad feminist? What was empowering for her about being a call girl? How did she disassociate at her lowest? How did she reckon with the New York Post journalist who outed her in the first place? And what were the powerful words of her estranged brother that arrived just when the media hounds were at her door? What will she tell her now elementary school aged kids as they grow up about her path? Melissa is no more immune to shame now than she was then, but she's also no longer naive enough to think that a call girl turned teacher would be a remotely resistible target. The good news is that, unlike many others who have been traumatized beyond resurrection by their mass media humiliations, Melissa Petro has just kept on going. And once you hear her story, you will see, just like I now do, exactly why. I go to the sympathy because I think I can't conceptualize feeling comfortable
Right.
with it. Am I being super
I
gutsy?
hope that's not the message that my book conveys. It's interesting because as you were describing that, like, in a like that emotional journey, at one moment I felt sympathy for you, because I'm like, oh, really? You never even like thought to explore that? Because there's a lot of push-pull factors that influence a woman's decision to engage in sex work. Financial need and, lack of resources. I'll speak for myself. There was definitely an opportunity to explore my sexuality and my femininity in that arena that I just wasn't encouraged to do elsewhere. So I would never like encourage people to feel sorry for me.
Yeah.
But absolutely, I think we could have sympathy for anyone who's a member a of a group that is so stigmatized,
Mhm.
and just so like profoundly misunderstood. Like, absolutely feel sympathetic for anyone who's put in that experience, regardless of what the experience was in the club or wherever they perform their work. We know what sex work means in our culture,
Mm.
and that is a lot to bear as a
Yeah.
person. And yeah, you're gonna recognize your assumptions and your
Right.
own conditioning when you notice that what you take as a given is untrue for someone else.
My first question was whether having a sense of sympathy makes you a bad feminist. My second question is it wrong or is it offensive to assume that women who are workers have had a damaging early relationship with a male figure?
You're you're good at
Mm.
this. Well, I'm not gonna ever say something is wrong, but I think that's something I've had to grapple with from the moment I made this choice that seemed presumably respectable women wouldn't. Um, why is the question? Why would a
Mm.
woman make a choice to perform sexuality for money? I think it
Mhm.
took me a lot of intellectual and emotional work to really recognize the violence that I had experienced early in my life, and to recognize that that violence is endemic in most women's lives. So to
Mm.
say it correlates with sex work, I think is a naive view. We've all been exposed to, if not overt violence, then microaggressions from the moment we were identified as female.
Mhm.
So I wouldn't correlate my participation in the sex industry to that. But I would say that it informed the choices that I made. So
Mhm.
the question is that offensive? Yes, in the sense that it exceptionalizes sex workers
Ah.
in a way that
Mhm.
we are not exceptional. We are all, as women, constantly exposed, and had
Mm.
been exposed as young girls, to violence. And what we do with that, how we interact with that. In some ways, for me, sex work was an empowering act because I turned the tables on that. I absolutely recognize that this was constantly expected of me, that I was only seen in this way. And so why
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
capitalize off of it and get my
Right.
education really to as a result? Why not if I know that this is the way I'm perceived anyways, why don't I then um use that strategically?
To your benefit. And I do want to say, first of all, thank you for being honest about it because this is the kind of conversation I wanted to have. I want to know. I want to know if my assumptions from my safe little world
Well, I'll just
are
say sex
offensive.
workers take offense to everything, right? Because we're constantly under attack. So when you're defensive, you're going to
Yeah.
take offense. And it's not
Okay.
necessarily because what you've done is offensive. It's
Yeah.
because we're tender. We're really tender. We're really self-protective.
Yeah.
And
And
so,
I
and
think
so
we've got
yeah,
to
that
be.
hurts because we're trying to keep ourselves safe, and we're constantly under attack and dehumanization, and sometimes inadvertently so.
I hope this feels like curiosity, and I would actually really
100%.
invite you to call me out on it if it doesn't, because even the verbiage, look, I'm trying to get better as a human. This is not just about the
100%. And
podcast.
that is really what we need to do better at as
Yeah.
a culture, because we're so offended all the time by everything. And it really stifles discourse. Obviously, yeah, we do get triggered. But can we tolerate that discomfort and really um come from a place of assuming the best? And
And I do want to say this. The word you used got to me. You said respectable. Respectable women don't do this. And it's ironic because even in my judgmental jump to sympathy, I would never use the word not respectable to
mm,
describe a woman who's a sex worker.
mm.
The word respectable never enters my vernacular with regards to sex work because, again, I go back to you don't walk in someone's shoes. So a lack of
And you also,
respect.
it seems like you come from this place where if anything, you err on the side of we're victims. And then there's others who will err on the side that we're villains. So even just having heard me say that I um, took advantage of women's exploitation and oppression, like that would be like someone would villainize me for doing that. Like that's me being a bad feminist, or that's selfish. And like you butt up against that a lot
Yeah.
in feminist circles, radical feminists who really think that sex workers are the enemies, especially those who don't completely claim victimizations. But if I'm going to come in and say, no, this was a decision for me, then for a certain sect of feminists, that's very offensive, and I'm absolutely an enemy for having made that choice. So that's the kind of attitude where I'm not a respectable person.
You tell me you're a pimp and you're using other people and you're trafficking other people. Yeah, that's not, you know what I mean? But anything where you put yourself in a risk, I don't understand how it could be seen as the villain. But let's go back to a little bit of the backstory for anyone who doesn't know you, because I did read the book, Shame, How to Be a Woman in the Age of Mortification. And I want to talk with you a little bit about your background, but also the origins of your notoriety. So in 2010, you were public school elementary teacher in the Bronx, right? And you wrote that op-ed piece for the Huffington Post. My understanding is using your experience as a sex worker to support the claim that not all sex workers are trafficked or underage.
Right.
So therefore, Craigslist shouldn't take down that page. And I think that was your intention behind writing it, because you used to sell your services on Craigslist. Can you tell me about the moment when you found out you had been, quote unquote, outed as the teacher who had been a sex worker? What was that like?
There was a really naive moment, some like hours before the headlines ran the next day, where I wondered which direction they would go. And I wasn't familiar enough with the New York Post, obviously, to even have asked this question. I didn't have internet in my house. I wasn't media savvy. I had a degree in creative nonfiction from the New School. I was writing a literary memoir, and I published my very first 700-word essay on the Huffington Post. My byline next to Hillary Clinton. Yeah, I was very, very proud. Again, very naive. I wondered, are they going to paint this as a story of someone who's improved their life and become a contributing member of society, and done everything we're asked to do, transition out of sex work and change my life? I was 3 years sober at the time. Or are they going to villainize me? And it's worse than even villainization. What happened to me? I was just painted as a portrait for the reason why teacher tenure shouldn't exist. So they have this sort of agenda where they're going to attack bad teachers, bad apples who are just taking advantage of tenure. So they were using my story for that, but mostly they were using my story just to say, look at this whore, and look at what she thinks she can be now. So you can't do that.
And it's the New York Post, so there was a direction they were going to go.
Right. You can't do that. You can't be that. You can't tell that story. That was the message that those headlines were sending.
And by the way, it's painting a very specific picture,
right?
That it's for titillation.
Absolutely.
Clearly. And that's what the New York Post trafficked them.
It's important to say that I was no longer working in the sex industry. I had transitioned out of that work. I had become a New York City teaching fellow, which is a prestigious program. I had multiple advanced degrees, beautiful resume. I'd worked in the nonprofit sector for years. They took me and put me directly into a classroom, and I got a degree in creative in childhood education, simultaneous to my experiences as a teacher working for 3 years. But there are teachers, especially college professors, adjuncts, who have side gigs.
Yeah.
We see a lot of those people exposed as well and demonized.
And I think
if it's somehow incompatible.
And I think part of this was also that it was elementary school. It was just too good of a story from the perspective of people who are looking to get the clicks. But taking a step back, I want to talk a little bit about your childhood. And it sounds like you had a kind of middle of the road childhood.
I'd say there was financial insecurity and some absent parenting due to their own conflicts. My parents were younger than I am now, and we a lot of us grew up kind of latchkey kids,
Yeah, that
kind of,
was the
in
generation.
front of a TV where, you didn't talk about things,
Right.
and that's generational.
Mhm.
And every family has their own constellation of
Yeah.
concerns. We had addiction and mental health issues in my family. My brother with special needs, never diagnosed, but um, we got by. I'm a white woman. There was a lot of, there's privilege to that. And just, it was interesting. I was in this place where I had just enough sense of entitlement that I really I was going to go to college, not because my parents had gone to college and they knew how to, fill out a FAFSA, but because I knew that was available to me
Right.
and I was going to make that happen. And I did. And I made that happen by becoming a sex worker, by working as a stripper.
Talk about such a study in contrast, right?
Right.
You describe your father has already moved out. Your mother says, no, you're going to college and we're going to make this happen.
Yeah.
And you know that there's a need for money. There has been no, you know, early abuse or anything that you've described in the book. And then you find yourself on a study abroad trip in Mexico.
Right. And I would say, I think when we talk about violence, it can be much more subtle. I never identified anything wrong with my growing up. And when I became a sex worker, I really wasn't going to identify anything wrong because I was, again, like I said, defensive. You think this, it's not true. But when we really start to explore, curiously and critically, our experiences, my father was an aggressive person. He was physically violent towards my brother. It wasn't questioned. I grew up in what I would now describe as there was covert sexual violence. It was a sexualized environment. But
Was
I
it?
don't know how unusual that is. How
Mm,
many of us our bodies are commented on, or we feel sexualized at a young age.
mhm.
I always knew that a female body was both something to be looked at and something that was unsafe as a result of
Mm,
that. So, how unusual is that? I don't know. But by the time I got to college and my mother kind of sprung into action, she's in a depressive state, just going through a divorce, but now her daughter's going to be who she wants to be.
yeah.
And she's going to make that happen. I won so many essay contests my first year. It paid for my first year of college. And then that second year of college, when you're in school, you're not eligible for the high school essay contest,
Mhm.
there was just this lacking. Part of my college experiences was that you alternated terms on campus with terms of volunteer or work experience anywhere in the world, which is beautiful. But if you come from a home without resources, they were not prepared to support me. It's called cooperative education. When I found myself on co-op in Oaxaca, Mexico, and my credit card gets denied at the grocery store, and that's the thing that was sustaining me. And my volunteer position is kind of falling apart anyways because I don't speak Spanish and because the ED is a little sleazy one time with me. And then I meet someone who says, hey, yeah, you want to make some money? I know exactly how you could make a lot of money. It all made sense to me. And then I just wouldn't tell anyone.
How
Was my
much hesitation did you feel when this man in
absolutely
Mexico, none, no
no.
hesitation,
No, because it
and
was
you were just going to dance at a club?
and to be fair, I had a friend back home who had made a similar choice back in Ohio, and I thought, "Oh, why would you do that? That's humiliating." Um, we're so and I'm like, "What
Mm,
are you doing?" But even then, a part of me was titillated.
mm,
She's basically doing what we used to go clubbing together, except she's getting paid.
mm.
Of course she's into it. I thought, oh, I'm going to be above that. And then I found myself in this position where, well, why don't I give it a try and no one will ever have to know?
Because you were in Mexico. It was sort of the
Well,
perfect
so what
storm.
happens here stays here, right?
It's a perfect storm of opportunity, frankly, because
Oh,
you were
right.
young. because you didn't know anybody there, because you
And
didn't
I
have
was
the
very
money.
young. And
Right.
that's something I didn't realize until I started working with girls and young women with experiences, what they described as sexual exploitation. I worked at an agency for girls who'd experienced trafficking. The girls described it in all different sorts of ways. But they were young.
Yeah.
19, you are a young person. You
I
are not
came
a grown up.
across old photos, and I showed my college roommate, and I said, "My God, we look like chipmunks covered in makeup. We just looked like I mean, we were children."
My 4-year-old thinks she's grown. And in some ways she is. Like, she's an autonomous being, right?
Wow.
So by 19, of course, I was like ready to
Well,
make decisions, and
we
and
thought
and
we were.
I wanted to explore my body and to
Yeah.
feel pleasure.
Um, you describe it as if you were just going dancing, but you were going dancing and then naked. So a lot of us were going dancing and we weren't gonna be comfortable being naked. You're like, I was just dancing. I'm like, right, but naked, right? But it's very clear in the way you describe it that you didn't hesitate to make the choice to start
No,
stripping, but you did immediately know you were gonna hide it from your boyfriend and your mom.
100%. And this is again, like, we're not conditioned to love our body and to not look at it and see its flaws.
Mm.
But I didn't see it as flawed. And it was I was receiving so much positive reinforcement. Like, I was like this white woman in Mexico
Mhm.
getting adored.
Adoration is
Everybody,
intoxicating.
it
I'm
was
not gonna fight you on
really,
that.
really validating in a way
Mhm.
that, like, I was like a mousy, nerdy, like bookish, try hard in high school. Like, I
Yeah.
was not a sexy person, I thought. I just feeling being
And
desired.
this is something I have heard a couple times in articles that I've read where people are saying, I did this and I enjoy this because it claimed my sexuality. And there's an undertone in all of it is I felt beautiful in a way I didn't before. I felt adored. I
In a
felt,
very, heteronormative,
yeah.
male gaze kind of way.
So a few questions on the scandal. We're sort of jumping back and forth in the timeline, but you're in New York. You write the article for the Huffington Post. Um, the reporter puts two and two together. Overnight, you were a pariah, is what you say in the book. At the same time, how did your family respond to the news?
So this was like 10 years after that first moment I'd set foot on a stage.
Mm.
And, I'd worked on and off as a stripper throughout college. And then I went through some difficult experiences and found myself back in the industry. And this is where it gets a little murky, right? And I think my story has these different layers. I was pretty alcoholic when I made the decision to go back into the industry the second time. And that time it was on Craigslist.
So it sounds like you had this boyfriend from very, very early on, Rick, and you're with him. You go to college. You are in Mexico. You start stripping. You don't tell him.
Didn't tell him, didn't tell my mom. The two people who knew me best and loved me the most didn't know me at all.
And then at some point, you have an affair.
Like, when did that start? Did
Mm.
it start the first time a customer touched me for cash? Or did it start the moment I let a customer touch me after the club when he wasn't paying? Or did it start the week after when I met the boy at the bodega and he took me on a date? And, and then so that was it was very confusing, because once you're doing something that you recognize as wrong, whether it's wrong or not, and I'm talking about stripping,
Mm.
then there's the veil of wrongness over you, and you can't really honestly assess your conduct. My conduct became pretty wrong pretty fast.
Yeah.
And you sort of live in a place of denial and intentional ignorance for
Mhm.
yourself, right? I had no moral compass because what I was doing I thought was wrong or right. So I did not tell my partner what I was doing for money. And I didn't tell him that I was having other intimate relationships. And I didn't feel safe to leave that relationship. And it just kept getting bigger and bigger. And this is what happens when we stop listening to ourselves and the way things feel. When we start to ignore pain,
It's an indicator.
pain is an indicator that something is wrong.
It's
And
a check engine light for your life.
the
Let's
moment
say.
I stepped off that stage and started to feel an inkling of pain,
Yeah.
I couldn't make sense of that. And it just got bigger and bigger and bigger.
And
So when
ignoring
I
the
was,
pain gives you permission to do more.
I don't want to ignore your question either. So
Mm.
when I was outed on the cover of the New York Post, my brother, who I did not have a relationship with, like I said, he had a really rough childhood. Him and my father were always at odds. Basically, my father hit him until he was old enough to hit back. And then it was that in the home, just really ugly violence. And then he, I didn't know then, but I know now, started using heroin, and he was a drug user. Very confusing because we had no idea what was wrong with my brother. I don't write about this, but I don't. You can use it. So he and I didn't really have a relationship, but like I said, I had been drinking and I got sober right before I became a teacher. And I was about 3 years sober, and he and I started to have a relationship when I got sober because he was also in and out of substance abuse.
NA or whatever.
So he sent me an email. Why is CNN trying to get a hold of Dad? Was the subject line. I don't speak to my father. I hadn't spoke to him since he walked away. My brother still sometimes talk to him. Then another email. Never mind. And then a third email that was like, I read your writing. I understand what happened. I want you to know I am so proud of you. It was so beautiful. I'm telling you, like, if you'd known, I don't talk to my brother. I still don't talk to him. We just don't have a relationship. We've
That's so
tried a
beautiful.
couple times when we've both been like when he's been clean and sober, and I'm pretty like I was really like militant about sobriety for a while. I'm still sober. But we've connected at times. This was like the most, and then never again. He didn't even come to my wedding because he just couldn't. Like he can't. And that's okay. But he came to me then.
What a beautiful
It was
glimmer.
so wonderful. And let me tell you, I spoke to my mother every week at this time in my life, every week diligently. She never mentioned it. One time, for whatever reason, it probably came up somehow. She said, I don't know why they're giving you such a hard time. That was my mom. That's a portrait of my mom. And my father, I haven't spoken to in years. So
that's really beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, to have my brother in that moment validate me in that way was so affirming. And that's what we need, like all the time. Like every day, I need to wake up and like walk into the cafe and be like, drop off was so hard. Let me tell you. And I need that person to be like, you're doing a great job, Mom.
Yeah.
Every day, because otherwise it just makes us sick to think, oh, I shouldn't have said that. Did this wrong. This is why this happened. It's my fault. It just starts to compound and compound and compound. And it only really takes one person to be like, you're doing good. You're doing
turn it around. Yeah. Yeah.
You're not a bad person.
What a
beautiful. I've never told that story. Or I have, but not during this,
something like this. Well, thank you for sharing that, because that is
Well, thank you
people.
for that question, because it really shows a difference, because I want like listeners to think, how would your parents respond if you were mass media humiliated?
Right.
Some of us have people who would jump to our defense, and I didn't. And then people would like appear, kind of like if you imagine dying and who would show up at your funeral. It felt like I was dead, and like, who's standing up for me? Who's sending me an email being like, hey, I saw you. And I think about this now when I see like Stormy Daniels or anyone being just like really brave in the face of like horrible horribleness,
Right.
who's standing up for that person?
Yeah.
You think they've got people. You think because you can see them on TV, they have resources, first of all.
And maybe not, right?
Oh,
You talk about Gloria Allred and going up and having
I've
your press
literally
conference
cold emailed her. Like, I sent an info at email being like, can you help me?
to
I don't
Gloria
know what
Allred.
it- Yes. And her people got back to, she's one of those like badass bitches who was like, how can I help you?
Wow. So then the next day you do this press conference?
I mean, maybe weeks or so later. Like, that was when I
Yeah.
realized I really was going to lose my job.
Yeah.
And then what would I do? And they were relentless. The media was still like following up and like stalking my social media accounts and just ridiculing me every chance they could get. I just was trying to like restore my dignity. I'm not trying to like make money. I'm just trying, like, I'm losing my job. How am I
Right.
going to pay my rent?
Right.
I was unemployable when
If
that
there's
happened.
nobody to call,
And they couldn't hire me because my name was
you were
just,
tainted in the media.
it was a distraction.
And we talk a lot. I like to look at the inside and the outside of what happens with a story like this. So there's the outside, which is on what grounds did the DOE fire you? And then there's the inside, which to me is how did the parents in the school respond to the news? Right.
For the most part, parents were not, the New York Post could not find a teacher or a parent who would speak badly of me. I was like impeachable at my work. I was very, very good at my job. Like, I liked teaching kids. I was teaching art. Like, how could you not?
How
I mean,
long removed was it?
I was 3 months sober
Okay.
when I started teaching. So not quite years, but it felt like lifetimes away because
Yeah.
I had surrendered to a program of recovery. I literally had to sign myself out of rehab to start teaching early, like sign myself out early. And like, I was in like gratitude list groups, like that time in my life where it was really hard. And I had a boyfriend who was like bad news. Like, yeah, I was still fragile and struggling, but I was never a bad person. There's a lot of people who are struggling and they can still function at work, or they're still good people who know how to like look a child in the face and give them what they need. You know, I was given an opportunity to be my best self every day.
They meet the energy you bring them. That
And
is all that they do.
I could just walk in there and be like, as soon as everyone's quiet, I'm going to pass out clay.
Fired. Having been the sex worker turned teacher who gets outed and then fired over a decade later now as a mom, do you see the DOE's choice the same way?
You know, I always tried to see it fairly because first of all, they didn't fire me. I resigned.
I know, technically you did. Yeah.
But they were going to fire me
Right.
for conduct unbecoming.
Right.
They said like my writing caused a distraction in the community and that I needed to be removed. Their job was to teach young children. So the legal argument would have been that it wasn't my writing that created the distraction. It was the New York Post that created the distraction. And then the second argument, this is like a free speech argument, is you have to argue that it's important enough to create the distraction. So I would have to argue the political importance of what I had been saying in that piece about the Huffington Post. That I could have made that argument, but I would have had to fight, and I didn't have resources, so I resigned.
Right.
And it was affecting my students.
Yeah, that makes
And
sense.
I did, and my colleagues. So the papers were hounding them for quotes. A disruption had been happened. By stepping down, it made it go away. So that is what I understood. Like, what could the DOE have done? Defended me? That's not their job. Their job is to educate people. So they had no choice but to do this process. I mean, so I didn't really hold it. You know, I didn't blame them.
So let's try to take a step back. While you're in Mexico, you find yourself at a moment where you decide to start stripping. That turns into what you call hypersexual behavior outside of your relationship. You end up having an affair. You end up breaking it off with that boyfriend. And then you fall into the alcoholism. And Um, the loneliness, you said, at that point is what drew you to Craigslist. And what I thought was really fascinating is you said that the sex work felt less lonely than the one night stand.
Oh, I'd
How is that
stopped having
possible?
after I
Sure.
stopped having sex for money, I was like, okay, I'm obviously just really lonely, so I should date. And then I would meet these dudes because you get nothing from it but
I
empty
mean, I would
sex.
assume.
At least if you're having sex for money, you get empty sex and money. So it's like, oh my God. Yeah, no, it was so much more degrading because you really walked out of there with nothing.
What about the orgasm? No?
What orgasm are you talking? I mean, this was not like these are not like good sexual encounters. Generally, I was not feeling anything then.
Terrible.
No, when you're in a like a hypersexual place, it's no longer pleasurable.
And at that time, do you think that you were working out your emotions about your relationship that had ended, or really kind of numbing yourself from everything from your
I
childhood?
think I was
What was
punishing
it?
myself, and I
You
was
were
trying to
punishing
feel
yourself.
and I was trying to feel good again because it
Mm.
was fun at first.
Was there a moment when you decided to quit it?
That's a great question.
I'm done.
There's so many moments like that.
Mm.
I
I mean,
it
maybe it was an awakening over time rather than one particular moment.
wasn't because anyone was terrible. Um, like the
Mm.
experiences are super benign. In fact, sometimes the guys were like on the verge of nice, where they're like, "He should not be doing this," but I'm gonna do it anyway. So not really nice. Um, there was a dude. I was working as a research assistant at Harlem Hospital while I was working
On
uh,
Craigslist.
as a call girl on Craigslist. And this guy was like, "Do you want to come to Paris with me?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I got to quit my job." So I did. He took me to the Four Seasons. And at that point, I was like really impressed by nice hotels. And we had like a really expensive meal because he was like thinking about becoming a chef. And I remember the meal was like $800 or something ridiculous like that. And I could not at any point feel like it was not fun. There was no pleasure. Like it was really clear to me that I was so disassociated and detached. Like even the meal, and maybe I was writing letters home or something. I just remember really knowing that like something really needs to change. This is not,
Mm.
these are like, this is nice. These are all nice things. He's a nice person. Like,
But
I
you're not happy. You're
can't,
not getting
not happy
anything
at
out of
all.
this. So
Not,
then you decide to basically come home through these experiences and go into a 12-step program?
what's funny, I was going to enter like the program's SLAA, which is the Sex and Love program, but the meeting was on Sunday or something. And my friend, a different friend than the other one, a friend from college, had taken me to an AA meeting at one point, like months earlier. And I was like, it was a women's meeting. These bitches are cool. Too bad they don't drink. They'd be a lot of fun.
So you were not invited back because you were like, "Margaritas, anyone?" Right. Yeah. They were like, "No."
I mean, I was going to support my friend. That's what I thought. But then I'm like dying, waiting for this meeting on Sunday, and it's like Friday. And I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to go to that AA meeting. So I have somewhere to sit tonight so that I don't like email a dude.
Yeah.
And then I was like, okay, drinking's a problem for me.
And by the way, you were clear in the book that you had not exactly hidden your past. It was not something
Yeah.
you were hiding from the
No.
school or
And
the
that's
people around you.
part
You
of
were
the
walking around
truth.
talking about it.
No, I mean, I wouldn't like,
Ultimately, you were quote unquote outed, right? In this very public way. And you took control of the narrative, you know, up front with Gloria Allred, in the press conference, and then over the years since then, and now with this book, Shame, which I understand was also part of your kind of journey of interviewing all these women and understanding the nature of how shame has affected their lives, where it comes from, all those types of things. So I want to get a little philosophical about shame. Does publicly admitting to our choices help rid us of our shame?
100%. And publicly, it can be like at a press conference next to Gloria Allred. Okay, that's super publicly. Or even the Huffington Post, pretty public, right? But maybe even it's just when someone says, hey, how are you doing? And instead of saying fine, like we're all programmed to do, we say, hey, I had a really difficult drop off. I did a drop off. My daughter, she's just having trouble separating. I already said goodbye. I gave her the kissies. She came at me again and I kind of put my hand out, but it looked like I pushed her and she like stumbled backwards and fell. And it's the same feeling. That mortification is the same feeling I feel when I would open the internet and see a headline of me. It's the same kind of what a monster I am.
What's interesting is that you point to those two things, which couldn't be more different, really.
Seemingly different, but it's the same.
But it's kind of a lot like when you are outed in a way that makes it seem like you were trying to hide this thing.
Right. Like I'm hiding my
Exactly.
my bad mothering, basically. Like my inability to love another person. Like it's all these triggers, right? The antidote is to reveal what we fear. So after that happened, I got to go and tell a million people that story happened. And hopefully they meet me with the reaction that you met me with, which is like the way a good mother meets a child in pain, which is like you kind of mirror the pain for a minute and then you make it light because it's not really a big deal and it's not personal and it happens to all of us. And
so truth cancels shame, right?
100%. You can meet someone to see this is a human experience, not a unique pathological you're not like uniquely flawed and sick because you did it. But our truth met with empathy is like healing. Like there's these ways to empathize and to meet someone where they're at, even if you've never been a hooker. You could be like, oh well, I've got this thing. Actually, that happened to me once. I was being interviewed by a producer to go on Chris Hayes, and she's like, oh, I really admire your story. I can really, really relate. I've never been a sex worker, but I had breast cancer. To her, it was like same. She's like, you're so brave that you don't keep that hidden because I know how it feels to keep something hidden. And we don't know how that feels.
The hidden nature of it is what's interesting. One of the things I've been thinking about as we've been talking is how defensiveness comes from feeling misunderstood. And the thing that pops into my mind is I've had 2 C-sections. And at one point, I was somewhere with some very conservative ladies, and someone said to me, You had a C-section by choice? I mean, why would you do that?
Right.
So my response was not very elegant. My response was, well, let me put it this way. So you chose to explode from the inside out twice by choice? Why would you do that? And she goes, okay, right? Like the conversation was over. So I'm not that elegant when it comes to my defensive-ness.
But you know what? A lot of us aren't, when met with shame, we're not elegant. We fawn. We just kind of like, please, I made a mistake and I'll never do it again, as if.
Right.
Or we just, fuck you, and then go drink. Or we did what happened to me all those years, which is just like completely leave ourselves and our experiences because it's just so painful.
Did you ever have a chance to talk to that reporter? Tell me about the conversation. It was in the book.
All right. So that reporter came back like a year later. I was like already on a new path. I was teaching adults creative writing and freelance writing myself. And she like covertly joined one of my one-day workshops, took the whole class, and then wrote an article. Like she's what was it? Like the hooker's back in the classroom again or whatever. It didn't have hooker in it, but it's bad though. It was bad. And I hated her for years. And I followed her.
You're like, I'm the thing this was built on, right? Like your name.
This is actually what we were just talking about, right? Like, I obviously still had a little bit of shame if I was so angry at her, right? I was still a little defensive. Like, oh, look at you, Miss like White House correspondent, for real, literally. I'm like, fuck you. Oh yeah. I was in the process of writing this book, and it kind of whatever got triggered. And I thought, you know what? I'm gonna DM her. And to her credit, she was like, yeah, let's talk.
Yeah.
And we talked for quite some time. Some of it was a little like, oh, but look, you've got a book deal now, so everything's fine. And there was a little of that. People think you're more resilient than you are. They think you're more savvy than I was.
They also don't want to focus on how they hurt you.
Yeah, because it hurts to hurt. They don't want to think that they caused someone pain. But she did acknowledge my pain in a way that felt seen. And then she told me about her story and why she was, in that position and how it felt to be in that position, and how deeply she regrets the pain that she caused. And we've all make mistakes, don't we? Or we all do things we're just not proud of.
What did you tell her about the final analysis of what she did and being outed?
Sometimes when we give an apology, it's kind of an apology but a justification, and I really was not going to let that be. I didn't get a lot of people jumped right away to like, oh, congratulations on your book deal, as if it was like in the bag.
Right.
But it was like 10 years later that I
Right.
sold a book. There was
Right.
no book deal in that moment. There was no silver lining to what happened to me. And there never would have been if I didn't handle it the way that I did. I spoke to others who experienced mass media humiliation who were destroyed. And that's it. Like, you can have a trauma that destroys you. And mass media humiliation is traumatic. You can have a trauma that you never recover from, or you can recover from trauma in a way that makes you stronger and more resilient. And that's what I was able to do. I was already a bit of a writer, so like I had just enough recovery to recover that. But no thanks to the people who harmed me. Like, it's not like they did me any favors. And I really did try to impress upon her that experience was a trauma for me. And she heard me, and she said that she apologized.
It's not as if anybody ever gave you the choice to pay with this much pain in exchange for quote unquote a journey and a book deal. This is what you created out
Right.
of what happened to you, and that's different. I
Right.
want to do a little bit of a lightning round. What's the difference between humiliation and embarrassment?
So embarrassment is the kind of thing that you can laugh about, and it's something shared. It happens to all of us. We all get the toilet paper stuck to the back of our shoe kind of moment. And humiliation is really when someone else has power over you, and they use that power to demean you with impunity, and it is incredibly painful. When we're humiliated, we know it's unjust. So to say I was humiliated, I knew what was happening to me was wrong, but I also felt ashamed because I did internalize some of it. So the second we start to internalize, it's my fault, that's when we're talking about shame.
And you wrote that there was a 2023 survey saying depression is obviously spiking in girls again. And among other sources, it has some of its origin in shame. How should we talk about shame with our daughters, which we both have?
Um, he- I don't know if it's so much talking directly about shame, but talking about everything, and not even talking so much as listening and giving them the space to share their thoughts and express their feelings. That's how we free ourselves from that imprisonment of self and shame, and the idea that what I'm feeling or thinking is uniquely me and uniquely bad.
And uniquely bad is the point. How will you talk to your daughter as she grows up about your story?
Age appropriately. She is so beautiful, and she admires me so. She walks around with my book. She's like, we should give a copy to my teacher. I'm like, okay. um she can know whatever she wants to know at any time, and I just know, like, we'll be able to do it gracefully together, um, because yeah, that's what I'm here to do.
Yeah.
She's my little teacher.
Well, and I think at the end of the day, the way that you feel peace about your story is the loudest thing your daughter is going to hear. Mhm.
As a way of regaining our own dignity and restoring our own power, but actually it might feel good, like, for a minute, but not really. Not
Mm.
really, because we're not living up to our own values when we do that. So shame, resilience is our other question. So what the reason why we're so activated right now, all of us, we're feeling humiliated, actually, because someone had power over us. A lot of people have power over us. So we feel helpless
Mm.
and powerless, humiliated, a lot of progressives especially. Okay. Feel that feeling. Just feel the powerlessness that we're feeling. This anger, the fear, all of that feeling. So to stop, shame resilience starts with feeling the feeling, acknowledging with the triggers. Okay, what is this kind of connecting to? All right, I'm going to talk about it. So
Mm.
actually, like, the last couple of weeks, I've just been like, oh, how can I put some kindness into the world? Because I want this world to be a kind place. It
Yeah.
doesn't feel very kind right now. What can I do differently? And then we start to feel empowered again, which is more powerful than telling someone they're a piece of shit.
Definitely.
It feels better, I promise.
Yeah. Yeah. And the election is a whole other episode. But
Sorry.
um, last question. Where do you sit with shame now?
Shame is a natural feeling. Like, you're never going to be shame resistant and not feel shame. That's like saying you're never going to feel angry. I am
Mhm.
not, like, above shame. The difference between me today and me, like, old me, is that I feel it frequently. I can acknowledge when I'm dysregulated. I know
Mm.
exactly what to do when I feel shame, and which is just to tell my story. And I have a beautiful collection of friends that I can just turn to at any given moment and be like, guess what I did? Or this is happening to me. And they'll be able to meet me with curiosity and compassion and empathy. And then we just sort of move through it together.
Yeah. Well, I will say this, having read your book, having dug into what happened to you back in 2010, and now having a better understanding of all of the things that led you to the choices that got you to the press conference with Gloria Allred to begin with, I am sure that there were people who reveled in shaming you.
Right?
And I think those people were doing it because it was satisfying from a moralistic perspective.
Mhm.
And I think some of them were doing it because it felt good to be punitive against someone whose story they really probably never took the time to understand.
Mhm. They kind of
Um,
lean into an assumption, and then it
yeah,
feels good. And I actually feel like we're a culture now of bystanders, where we're watching things happen that don't feel quite right, but we don't really have the courage to stand up against them. And my job, like why I'm here on earth, is to really encourage people to stand up and just speak up whenever we can for what we feel is right.
well, and I will say that it's pretty clear nobody really stood up for you at the time. But given how your mom responded and how your brother responded, I can also see why you were the person who was strong enough to stand up for yourself.